Commissioner, what page are you referring to?
It's page 31.
Greg, isn't that percent of budget and not necessarily their collection rate to the levied tax?
Yeah, that's right. So I believe what the answer there is that their basis for budgeting might have been slightly different than the basis for budgeting for general fund property tax collections.
Okay, and 911 then. Okay.
And 911, they might all be a little bit different because they budgeted. It's a little bit different assumption perhaps in their budgeting. All right, on page 35, let's see here. One thing I want to mention is this is Public Health Fund 274. We will be processing all of the costs and revenue associated with the vaccine center operations through this fund. So in the near future here, probably in the next month, definitely in the next monthly report, we will start to see the expense lines grow and the revenue lines grow eventually as we receive reimbursement. But we're keeping all that fiscal activity all in this one fund here. So we'll look for a change in that as soon as next month. All right, let's go to page 39, which is the road CIP. And I just wanted to mention to you here, if you look down at the bottom, the projected ending fund balance of $20.4 million. So last month, that was $15.8 million. So pretty significant change month over month. But the reason why is in this note here, you'll see note C, $5 million contribution to the Terrebonne refinement plan is being pushed to FY22. So all of a sudden, they're no longer projecting that $5 million, which was in this number here, now isn't, and produces this variance out here. So the funding will carry over to next fiscal year, and so will the expenditure. So we'll look for that next year. But just wanted to highlight that. And then let's go to page 42. And this is the Fair and Expo Fund. So some good news for Fund 615. And I'm going to point your attention down here to the transfers. So part of what I showed you earlier on the TRT side flows through to the Fair Fund. And the way it impacts it here is this number, this transfers in room tax of $813,000. Last month was about $500,000. It was just under $500,000. And so based on the new projections, we're increasing this projection by about $300,000. So this does two things. Is one, in the budget, this line item right here that has $25,744, that's the line that the Budget Committee and the Board approved up to an additional $250,000 in unallocated room tax to subsidize the fair through the impact of COVID. But we will no longer need that now. So this, we won't see that here because the fair is essentially, the Fair and Expo is essentially receiving those funds as they would have based on the percentage allocations from TRT. So that's good news. The other good news, and this is tied into not only these transfers, but the other revenue items that Jeff and his folks at the fair have been working on, Fairgrounds, and cost-cutting reductions, is at the very bottom. It will drive the ending fund balance, which we were concerned about pretty significantly over the course of the year. It'll drive that down to above zero. And right now the projection is about $283,000 in positive fund balance. This does not have any projections in it for the rent that we expect to receive basically from FEMA for the use of the facility as a vaccine distribution center. That will again have positive impacts on the financials. I believe that may be it. Oh no, one more change, one more thing to note, and that's on page 48. And that is our risk management fund. And I just wanted to let you know that the projected ending fund balance here is of 8.6 million, is about $250,000 more than it was last month. And that's essentially due to, as the year goes by, we reassess where we think our expenses are going to be and our revenue. And one big change here is this general liability cost. This projection of $900,000 was reduced from 1.2 million. So that savings essentially goes down to the ending fund balance. And I did have one more note. So Health Benefits Fund, which is on the next page, that's Fund 675 on page 49. Again, we continue to project our expenses month by month, and the primary driver in this fund is this health benefits line. So the projection for expenses of 19.4 million is up about 600,000 from last month at 19.4 million. So it's up from last month, but we're still about $500,000 under budget. And what that means down here, when you project the ending fund balance of about $15 million, that last month was about 15.6 million. So 15 million versus 15.6, and you can compare that to where we thought we'd be budget-wise of 13.6. So trending in the right direction, but a slight dip in additional projected expenses for that for the month. I believe that's all I have. Are there any questions about fiscal report or finance or budget or anything like that?
I'll just acknowledge it's exciting to have the health benefits dialed in so well. It's kind of a cost contained, and kind of the resources are there. We're able to use them as we need them, and it's a stable fund.
And I'll
I
just
agree.
comment, that resource revenue for solid waste is at 70%. The year to date is 66.7. So they're still ahead of year to date. And it's the busy time of year now.
Yeah. Time for spring cleanup. Anything else?
That's it for me. I'll sign off if
Great.
there's no other questions.
Nope, looks like we're good. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Greg.
Right, you bet. Have a good day.
Item number 6, DLCD Technical Assistant Grant Progress Report. Hello, Tanya.
Hello, Commissioners. Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Wonderful. For the record, Tanya Saltzman, Senior Long Range Planner. I'm here for 2 items today, but the first one is for an update on the DLCD Technical Assistance Grant progress report, just checking in with the board. As the board knows, we've been awarded a while ago a technical assistance grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development for essentially two projects. The first is wildfire, which has been going on a separate track with our associate planner, Kyle Collins. And I'm here today to talk about the latest in the wildlife inventory update. I believe the last time I checked in with the board, we were in progress with the interagency working group, and we've kind of hit another milestone. So I'm here to just give you a brief update on that, and then give you a little bit of a preview or a preview for our upcoming public outreach, which we're really excited about and we're preparing for as we speak. So the general task of the wildlife inventory update is to begin the task, which is a very long task, of potentially updating our Goal 5 wildlife inventories for 3 inventories. And that's kind of the scope of the grant, just 3. And the Technical Advisory Committee, and this I've reviewed with the board in previous meetings, so I'll just go over this part fairly quickly. The Technical Advisory Committee, with input from the ODF&W and the county, as well as our consultant, Mason, Bruce, and Gerard, they honed in on three different inventories to update: the mule deer winter range, elk winter range, and sensitive bird habitat, and that includes bald and golden eagles. These are all pretty much about 30 years old in its current form, and we're aware that there's plenty more besides these three, but the limitations of this grant are such that we had to put a cap on it at some point. So the consultant, with their interagency working group with Fish and Wildlife and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, they looked at their data together, looked at the methodologies of how they collected this data. These guys are the technical experts. This is what they do. So they discussed, is it deer collar data? Is it GPS tags? I don't even know how they do it, but they do it. And they discussed it and made sure that all of this data made sense. All of it was collected in a meaningful way that they all agree upon. And what they came up with was a report that I've included as an attachment to this memorandum, just summarizing where they've observed these new habitats. And obviously, in 30 years, you can imagine that it's changed a lot for numerous reasons. The purpose of this meeting today is not necessarily to go into the details of what was in the report. I'll let the board kind of peruse that over time. But just to tell you that our next steps in the project are to take this information to the public. And our plan is to do 2 virtual open houses on April 15th and April 29th. This will be very similar in format to what we did for Wildfire. They will be on Zoom and probably some combination of Facebook Live and other platforms so that people can participate in numerous ways. We will have the consultant there, Wendy Wente, who's our wildlife biologist from Mason, Bruce, and Gerard. She will do the bulk of kind of the explaining of the actual technical aspects of the data collection and what it actually means, perhaps a little bit about why the deer are over here now as opposed to over here, et cetera. Obviously, I'm making that very simple. And we'll also have members of the expert technical team from ODF&W to support Wendy and to answer any questions. And we'll explain kind of the whole structure of the project and what it means, what it could mean. The consultants will talk about their methodologies, and we will show some maps. And then mostly the kind of purpose is to take the temperature from the public. What does the public want to see? What are their concerns? Do they support potentially going forward with this wildlife inventory update? What is a wildlife inventory update? So this will be, we'll have a survey embedded in a website just like we did for Wildfire. It'll probably be a bit simpler because there's, with Wildfire, we had defensible space and R327, very specific avenues, whereas this is a little bit more general at this time. It's kind of more just gauging general support for moving forward. And we'll have, in addition to the opportunity for the public to weigh in at these 2 meetings, we'll also have this survey open online to the public for probably about a month, a little bit before and a little bit after those 2 meetings. We'll collect that information. If people think, yes, this is a fantastic idea, we think the board should go ahead with it, or no, we have concerns about this or this. We're going to collect that data and then ultimately fold it all into one report and bring it back to the commissioners with the data from the consultant and just a general outline of potential next steps. What actually does a Goal 5 wildlife inventory update entail? And as the board knows, we're hopefully embarking on a comprehensive plan update in the very near future. And our vision is, if the board decides to pursue this is folded into that. This is one facet of the comprehensive plan update that we weigh against, other things that are part of the comprehensive plan, whether that's housing or wildfire or all of the above. So this is just a very preliminary step on figuring out what the general idea is about going forward. We're not yet proposing specific amendments or maps or any kind of regulatory or non-regulatory options. It's just a general, more conceptual phase of this project. And then we'll, as time goes on, if the board chooses to pursue this, that's when we would get into a lot more of the details in terms of like drilling down into potential geographies. I will say that, just because the data shows a certain polygon of habitat that doesn't necessarily translate exactly into a zoning overlay that will be exactly that thing. You know, there's definitely some changes and some massaging and you know, it's not exactly as is right now. So in other words, this is the very first step. So, and that's our general plan. The terms of the grant itself, which is just intended for this first data collection step, the terms of the grant end at the end of May. So we'll be wrapping up this first phase then. But after that is what comes, you know, that's when the board's decision-making process will determine if we're going to move forward with any sort of future updates and exactly how we would do that. So that's our general update. I'm happy to answer questions about our plans for the public outreach. I will say that those of you who are familiar with our wildfire outreach, we did what's called a story map, which is kind of a fancy website, and we're working on one of those now. Our intention is to have a bunch of the map data in greater detail than what was provided, you know, just as those appendices in the report. I know there's been some concerns from the public that those maps as is, you know, it's pretty general. It's zoomed pretty far back. But in the public outreach, we have some pretty fun map tools where you're going to be able to click through some layers, look at old versus new data, zoom in, do things like that, so you can get a little bit more of a picture of what the scientists found beyond just the what's provided in the appendices today. And we're looking forward to it. It's some really interesting technology combined with hearing from the public. It's a great synergy. So we're looking forward to that, and we'd love to have you attend or ask any questions.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. You know, on the bald and the golden, I used to have a red-tailed nest by my house, and they did not use that nest every year. It was very interesting. And then they'd come back, and I'm just wondering, do the bald and golden use the same nest every year? Do you know?
I cannot answer that, unfortunately, but that is definitely a question that we can ask
Right.
our
I thought
wildlife
that was
biologists. That's exactly the kind of thing that we want to hear about. Yeah, that's.
I mean, it was very fascinating because
Yeah.
they were so magnificent, and you would just want them to be there. It was like 150 feet up in a tree, and it was just beautiful. And then this last, winter that we really haven't had this low, but it's great to see that there's like 100 inches at Hoodoo and 110 inches of snow at Mount Bachelor. But normally we see the elk herd like on Goodrich, and I have not seen the elk this winter. Normally we see like 140 elk. So I'm just thinking maybe it's because the snow really hasn't come down that far. So it'll be nice to talk to an expert and see why did they not come down, you know, that low.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, these are the kind of things that I wish I knew, to be honest. But this is exactly the kind of questions that we want to have the consultant and the team answer. So I'll make a note of those. Thanks.
Well, thank you.
When I was reading through the report, I was concerned, or I was a little bit puzzled and a little concerned that the mule deer migration corridors was sort of identified as this is important, but we don't have the resources to complete this right now. And I don't know if there are ways, talking to ODF&W or kind of wildlife stakeholders in the region to get a feel for what areas would, can we get at least a little bit of a sense of what areas would have popped out if we did do a look at wildlife migration corridors, and if some of those areas are really important from a land use planning perspective to look at, whether there's some way we can kind of shoehorn a little bit of that information in, at least on the back of the mule deer winter range or something like that.
That's a good question, and I know that did come up when they had to select 3. I know it was hard for them to select only 3. I think, I cannot speak for the biologists, but I do think that they believe that, given the kind of scale of the change of the 3 that they chose, this was the best bang for the buck, essentially. I know that's a terrible phrase to use, but I think that, they, in their experience, is also with, how has this been impacted by, or how has this intersected with development? Because often these are the people who are called upon when there are development proposals to say, hey, do you see a conflict? So this was what they deemed most important. And we can certainly ask them about the migration corridors in the open houses. I don't know if they can actually be folded into an official update if it comes to that, because it is technically a different inventory. But I think, what's exciting about this project is that, this doesn't normally happen. These updates, a lot of counties and cities, they have their one update and they kind of roll with it forever and don't ever update it. So this is intended, we're treating it kind of as a pilot project. So hopefully this will be successful and get support from the public. And then perhaps we'd find either funding or other ways to pursue additional inventories. And I think the migration corridor would be right up there. But I think it's definitely worth asking them just anecdotally what they've experienced with respect to that, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah. I'd agree. I mean, just like this last map showing, what our current elk overlay looks like, that the very small area, and then seeing that, for huge chunks of it, there's basically no elk activity now, or no observed elk activity now. It's troubling, and I'm sure there's all sorts of. There's a very multi-layered story to be told about,
Absolutely.
for example, why elk aren't using the area south of Bend very much, this area between Bend and Sun River very much anymore, or if they are, why we're not seeing them. But I'm very glad that we're doing this update process.
Thanks, me too. And I will say, on kind of the opposite side of what you're saying, Commissioner Chang, for instance, with the bird nest, there's a lot more, and some of that is actually, from what I've been told, purely just that data collection has gotten a lot better. They're just better at finding those nests and figuring out where they are. So it doesn't necessarily always mean that there's a tenfold increase in these nests. It might just mean that their observation skills, or however they gather that data, is better, which I find very interesting. And I think they'll be able to drill down on that in some of our public outreach.
No, but for the elk in particular, I do know that area south of Bend, what used to be a very elk-rich area, and that there's not very much activity anymore. So it'll be fun to talk to a wildlife biologist about what's going on.
And then the other side
they've
of
been
it
a great
is that,
team. So
Lower Bridge, the wolves have been spotted and documented. So apparently there's a pack at Mount Jefferson, and they travel up 30 miles a day, possibly. So anyway, I know the wolves in Eastern Oregon really impacted the elk there, and they were pushing them out into the wheat fields, which was not their normal diet. So, yes.
So question kind of at the high level here. So this is a published report now from Mason, Bruce, and Gerard in its final format or draft format?
Their report, I believe, it's a final format.
Okay.
It will also be folded into, once we're done with this whole outreach, into kind of the county's final big report. That'll be an appendix to that report.
So this is
similar to what was done in Wildfire. Yeah,
a stable piece of it. That's what I was getting.
exactly.
And then there's community outreach going to happen. So digesting it,
Exactly.
sharing information about what it is, how we got here, what assumptions can be made from it. Are the numbers going up or down? Is there anything we can point to that's affected these species positively or negatively? I'm just, I'm thinking, what are we? And then the goal is going to be any land use decisions in the future, the comprehensive plan about what we might. It'll just be a good reference point, I guess.
Yeah. And then, this is not yet a decision point for the board, but eventually, once we kind of collect all the public outreach, combine that with the consultant data, and we'll provide the board with options on what it actually means to do an inventory update in terms of, it's statewide planning goals specify it's a very specific process. The board could choose to bite off a little bit of it or a lot of it, or, we'll provide that information, and that will be a decision point later in the process. So.
Well, the elk have been around my house and my property and my neighborhood all winter, so just confirming. They're out there. I've seen them.
I know that Scotty moved her ranch up to Culver because in Lapine, they were going through her horse operation constantly.
Yeah,
you know.
well, and I always wonder, is it the same group when we see,
Right.
you know, once in a while we see them come and go and stuff, and I always wonder if it's the same group or not, or how much they move around.
I know, they need to have bells or something, don't they?
Well, color code the herd, so if it's the same herd, I know which herd it is or not.
Yes, you need to name them.
You can have the neon
Name
pink
tags?
one.
Well, I just don't know if they're the same elk or not ever, you know.
There's a herd of deer right by my house. It says no hunting on the fence, and those deer can read, and that's where they are. Like, it's their favorite pasture. It's alfalfa, and they love it.
Yep.
So,
It's amazing.
And-
Okay,
Yeah, and there is in the last couple of years, a wolf pack has set up in the headwaters of the Umpqua River Basin. So, I mean, that's basically like southwest corner of Deschutes County. So I would, I would expect that when I've spoken to various wildlife biologists, they constantly are just scratching their head about, well, we got a wolf pack up there in like the south end of the Warm Springs Reservation. We got a wolf pack up in the headwaters of the Umpqua River. It's sort of just it's a puzzling thing why there aren't any in Deschutes County yet.
no, there are.
I mean,
No, they've seen them, they've spotted them in Lower Bridge.
but there's sightings, but we don't have an established
Oh.
pack.
Well, one went by my house about a month and a half ago because one of my horses was completely distraught, and she's not. I've had her, since she's a baby, and she's 14, and she was like, "Oh my!" And I knew something had really bothered her.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, yeah, because it's not that far from Lower Bridge to my house, so they
Yeah.
sorely could be.
We're one of the counties that does not yet have a wildlife depredation, a livestock depredation committee, which is basically a local body that kind of helps us tap into compensation. So if there's livestock owners who suffer losses, they can tap into a state and federal compensation for the loss of livestock to wolves. If you have one of these committees in place, and you can have someone come out and can check out the scene and verify that this was a wolf kill, or that there were wolf impacts. So if there is, if either of you are hearing from people, that they have real fears that they're going to suffer livestock losses, it might be worth our while to think about setting up one of those committees. I was actually asking Nick about it, maybe a month ago, and if we're not hearing from people that there's potential impacts, then I don't know if we need to worry about it. But when there are losses, it's good to have the committee in place already. So
I'll talk to some of my neighbors.
yeah, where there's elk.
yeah. Well, yeah, we'll know if there's activity, there'll be coverage, and yeah, it'll come on quick, possibly, if that's really happening. Okay, Tanya, thank you very much for that. And now we're going to move to the next item that you're representing today. Item number 7, preparation for a public hearing on marijuana housekeeping text amendments.
Wonderful. I will just add one quick thing, is that we also plan to do kind of a press release and put it all over the
Okay.
website in terms of the public outreach for the wildlife. I forgot to mention that
Got it.
earlier,
Okay.
but we will sound the horns. So anyway, here I am for item number 2. This is in preparation for a public hearing, which is scheduled for March 31st. That's a week from Wednesday, concerning the marijuana housekeeping text amendments. These are essentially meant to reflect the changes that were resulting in the opt-out vote. In other words, the Measure 9-134. Technically, that was a no vote on that. It's a little confusing, but the no vote ultimately voted no to repealing the temporary first wave of opt-out ordinances. So most of these code changes are meant to kind of clarify that, put it in the code, because right now it's not in the code. It's simply just the results of the election. And then we also have a couple other little housekeeping changes relating to other marijuana-related developments in the last, I would say, year or so. And then a couple things like typos and numbering things that we just wanted to clean up. So I'll provide a brief summary of those, and please feel free to ask any questions. In your packet, I provided a draft ordinance with all the exhibits, which are the proposed text amendment chapters, as well as draft findings. So the first proposal, the first chunk, is simply removing marijuana production and processing, which those are the ones affected by the opt-out, removing marijuana production and processing as permitted or conditional uses in the zones where they appeared before, just simply taking that out. That's an primarily exclusive farm use and multiple use agricultural, but a couple of other districts as well. That was a pretty straightforward change. The second change is essentially acknowledging and clarifying that those production and processing businesses that were existing already prior to the opt-out, they're allowed to continue to exist, and we're putting them into kind of two different categories. The first is for those who have initiated the use. In most cases, this means those who've received their OLCC licenses. There's a few cases there where they haven't yet received their licenses, but they've demonstrated that they've essentially made a good faith effort towards initiating the use. As we know, there's a bit of a lag time between a lot of applicants receiving their permit from the county, and then they're waiting in that queue that we've discussed at length before for their OLCC license. So those who have already initiated that use, they will now be considered a non-conforming use. So that's their new kind of box that they're in. And the code for non-conforming uses provides criteria in case they want to make an alteration to their property. This is something we've been asked about before. So just in sum, those who have initiated the use will become a non-conforming use. And then the other side of that coin is those who have not yet initiated the use. So essentially those who are in that waiting list for OLCC, they haven't initiated the use, so it can't yet be a non-conforming use. So therefore, we're categorizing them as a modification of approval. If you want to change that permit, say you want to move a building from the east side to the west side, that's a modification of approval, and that's a land use process that goes through our current planning department. So that's how they get split up. Then the next chunk of amendments are essentially clarifications, and these are stemming from discussions we've been having, our legal department, Adam Smith, with OLCC, as we've discussed at length before with the board. So these are not essentially changes to how we treat things, but just clarifications in the code to clarify, essentially. The proposed text amendments clarify that a change in ownership of a land use permit issued, it doesn't require either a modification of approval or an alteration of a non-conforming use. And this basically stems from the fact that in the county, and again, we've mentioned this before, but in the county, the land use permit travels with the land. So essentially, if my name's at the top of it, or if your name is at the top of it, it still is associated with that address. So that clarifies that the change in ownership doesn't trigger any sort of change. And that's meant to clarify primarily for OLCC, but also to the lay people or users of the code. And related to that, a change in location for a land use permit issued for production or processing is prohibited. And again, that kind of folds up into the concept of the land use, the permit traveling with the land. If you're changing the location, you're no longer at the address that it was permitted for initially, so that's not allowed, and that's kind of always the way it's been. So we've added language into the code to clarify that. And Adam, I see you're here. Feel free to jump in if there's kind of legal nuances that I'm not capturing. And then lastly, this is not relating to the opt-out, but this is just a little bit of housekeeping. The proposed text amendments remove youth activity center separation distance from the marijuana code. This isn't, the code will not be really applicable to new production and processing, but it was meant to clarify. This is resulting from the Court of Appeals decision on WaveSeer. Youth activity was determined to be too general, or it wasn't reasonable in terms of providing a predictable way to apply. So we've stricken it, from the code just to keep it clear based on that decision. Those are the amendments. That's a brief summary of that. Does any board members have any questions on those before I continue?
Sounds like a good package, kind of the package following a citizen's election on the process. I was just thinking that, I got to see the whole evolution of the terminology Youth Activity Center, because, I was at the table when we said, oh, well, let's make sure, if there's a defined, youth, we use the term Youth Activity Center, but, the vision was a Boys and Girls Club or, some service, that there would be a distance. And then that sure became a litigated matter for many, many years. So it's kind of a shame. But on the other hand, it did what it was there for on one hand, too. It really, thought about the impacts that were just the perceived conflicts in the rural county or, actual from whichever point of view you are. So just interesting seeing it go away now.
Been quite a journey,
Yeah.
I will say. If there are no further questions, I'll just continue briefly with a couple other points. This was brought before the
Question
Planning
here.
Commission.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I did want to ask about, along the way during our marijuana discussions, there were inquiries, requests made about modifying hours of operation, modifying the inspection regime for existing.
Yes.
And I know that we have plans to address those considerations, but I was just trying to figure out whether those are, whether that's kind of like a separate strand from what we're talking about, or whether the things will come together for, when we have our public hearing, will there be any discussion of those items? Or will the public hearing really just focus on these text amendments in this package that we're looking at? That's, here in front of us right now.
That's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up. Those will be separate. Short answer is they are separate. Basically, the purpose of this kind of chunk of amendments is to address the opt-out with specifically processing and production, as well as the youth activity, which also had to do with production. The next wave, which I think will probably be in the next couple of months, we have our newest planner working on those right now. Since those came from requests from Deschutes County residents and applicants, we've kind of put that in a separate bucket. Especially one has to do with retail, the hours. So that's kind of its own island, its own separate thing. So we're treating that separately. As well as the request about annual reporting, modifying that. That's going to be separate because those are they bubbled up from a different source essentially. So they're going to be a separate process, but forthcoming pretty soon.
Great, thank you.
I don't know if Nick, you have anything else to add?
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, I just pulled up our calendar here, and I think we're going to begin to discuss those with the Planning Commission as early as April 8th. So they are coming up here in short order. I'll meet with Brandon, our new planner, here in short order and confirm the dates. But yes, thank you, Commissioner Chang. They're coming up very soon.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank the Planning Commission for being involved in reviewing these also. I mean, this is the process. We're getting to see it here. That's another diverse group of people from around the county looking at this package before we even get it. So a special thanks to the Planning Commission.
Thanks. That's actually a great segue to.
Oh yeah, what's next?
acknowledging
Okay.
that we took it in front of the Planning Commission, so that's perfect. We did not have a hearing with the Planning Commission. It's not necessarily required in this case, and because these are relatively straightforward, we just wanted to have them review it. They provided some good edits on just some typos that we missed, which gives me great satisfaction. But they had no significant concerns or changes or anything like that. So we thank them for the review, as you noted. And lastly, I just have a question for the board. If the board would like to consider adoption by emergency for this, and if so, I'm not sure if that's something that's immediate or 30 days or any other kind of option about that. Or, the traditional non-emergency would be 90 days. So that's, I'll write up the appropriate ordinance depending on the board direction for the public hearing next week.
So I saw that in here, anticipates adoption by emergency, but just as one person, I don't know that, I wouldn't go down that path unless there was a reason. I guess I'm kind of lost for the reason. 90 days, it's, I don't know what application is going to be affected or what opportunity is open that's going to be affected.
I think the staff's interpretation was, and legal might have more thoughts on this, was just that because it's reflecting mostly the election that already happened recently, just time was of the essence in that consideration. Adam just popped up. Maybe he has more thoughts on that.
I mean, that's,
Yeah, hi, Commissioners. Adam Smith, Assistant Legal Counsel. It's, of course, the Commissioner's call. Our thought was to just, have a belt and suspenders approach for the community as a whole. An argument can be made that anybody can submit a land use application for a new marijuana business at this time and proceed through the entire land use permitting process, only to then be denied a license from OLCC. And so we're trying to ensure that nobody wastes resources on what would likely be a fruitless endeavor by getting those code amendments in place as soon as possible. And then secondarily, as Tanya mentioned, there are some very, I would say, crystal clear language that we're adding to the code to provide clarity for the existing marijuana businesses and also OLCC on how those businesses are supposed to be treated going forward. I'm aware of at least 4 businesses in Deschutes County that are looking to purchase existing marijuana production facilities. And so there's at least 4 of those businesses that are hoping for certainty sooner rather than later. Of course, it's the board's discretion if they want to adopt it by emergency, wait the entire 90 days, or any period in between.
Adam, those potential purchases, are those entities considering purchasing active existing operations, or some of this category where licenses that have been approved, but or permits that have been approved, but where production is not happening yet?
I've spoken to attorneys representing the buyers of 2 of those cases, and I believe in both instances they would be purchasing businesses that have been permitted, licensed, and are operating. I've played phone tag with an attorney representing the 3rd business, so I don't know if it's up and operating or if they're just purchasing the land use permits and the license. And I have no information at this time on the 4th. I just found out about the 4th literally a few minutes ago.
Okay, thanks.
Well, any thoughts about emergency order or not?
well, it has been over 4 months, so I can see why it's suggested if we all voted for it.
Yeah.
I definitely see the value of making the rules clear for everybody, so that people aren't trying to apply for things that, have no chance of going anywhere, so that people who are trying to figure out how to operate their business, moving forward, know what the rules are. I don't have a good sense of, if we go the emergency adoption path, does that take, 3 times as much staff time, or, are there costs associated with that?
It's just adding a few words to the ordinance,
Okay.
right? I mean,
I mean, emergency clause in a land use matter is all perception and it's all history. Back in the day before LUBA existed and you had a 21-day appeal window, the 90 days had some relevance, but the fact of the matter is, if anyone wants to challenge this, they'd have to challenge it through the appropriate processes, either a writ of review in circuit court or through LUBA, depending upon where the jurisdiction lay. And as a result, the 90 days is somewhat archaic. But commissions are reluctant to do that because the minute you start approving things by ordinance, that gets people's attention. and they see black helicopters and things like that when you do things by emergency. So a concern kind of comes about that, well, emergency means something, but in this context, with the appeal periods already being limited through other processes, it really doesn't fit for land use as well as it does general county ordinances. And so the statute, the ORS that dates back decades and decades, predated LUBA. So matters that filter to LUBA have a much shorter appeal window anyway. So it's got a lot of that working. It's not an easy answer. It does require unanimity by the board to pass by emergency, so either 2-0 or 3-0, depending upon how many of you are here.
And then, yeah, these are housekeeping text amendments. We're keeping, just organizing it to make it the best set of code it can be by emergency. It's like, is that even the statement? So that's all. It's a good discussion to have, though, each time, because emergency, instead of having this window of, well, we're going to do something, and it really matters, and it's going to go into effect 90 days from now, we're going to do something that really matters, and it needs to be done now. So just getting the words around why it's an emergency. And yeah, I mean, Dave, thank you very much for kind of putting perspective around it, that it's almost semantics, but it is land use, and, because, if we do it by emergency to be effective immediately, there are situations where the media could be picking up on it that day, so it's published the next day, and then somebody finds out, hey, wait a minute, that mattered to me. So it's just something.
Right. And can I just kind of check on our process? So if we have a public hearing on the 31st, that'll be, is that essentially the final opportunity for anyone who wants to weigh in on these text amendments to come in the door, or is there a period to receive written comments, or how does this process exactly work?
This is a legislative matter, so it's open up to anybody in any time. Somebody could come to us directly or call us and communicate about it also. Public hearing, we'll be putting it on the record in a public meeting, but we could bring in any feedback from anybody also. So just by bringing it to this meeting today and having it in the Planning Commission means there have been opportunities for people that are interested in the subject to hear about it, see it. It's been printed in the packet, so
Right.
it's kind of out there already too.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers. I was just
I mean, anyone who's concerned about this, I'm just trying to go through in my head. Is there any chance that they were hiding under a rock and they've missed that this is all happening? It sure seems like it's been in the public eye and been fairly visible. So.
Well, this is the proposed package. I guess do we want to get more clear about emergency? Is there support by both of you? So emergency to be,
Yes, if we have a 2-0 vote or a 3-0 vote, then it can be declared by emergency, correct? It has to be unanimous.
unanimous, yeah.
So, sure, do we have to vote on emergency right now?
Nope, but we're putting direction to it, just
Okay,
making sure.
Sure.
Is there any?
I can provide versions, both versions to bring to the hearing if that's.
Well, it sounds like we can get there today. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just making sure we're having a discussion about it, this is it. So, I mean, we can get to emergency to be implemented or to be effective immediately would be what we would do. So that can be the default starting point, and then if something else changes, we'll back off from that. How's that sound? Because, we're not voting today, but it's just giving direction to it.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, good. So we'll start off, just like it's been mentioned, as a emergency order, proposed emergency order, and then if it changes, it'll change. So.
That's great. And if I may add, just for I don't know, we have not yet received any public comments, either written or verbal, just if that helps the commissioners make their decisions. And notice was published in the bulletin, I believe, on Sunday. So it is out there in some capacity for sure.
That may be coming. Okay.
Don't forget it's March Madness, and the Beavers and the Ducks are both playing, Tanya. This is really...
Yeah, so maybe people aren't paying
a
attention.
bit distracted for the first time in ever.
Sorry, I don't speak sports.
You don't? Oh my gosh. Well, it's a really big deal. And, yes. And
College
it's-
basketball.
It's the first time ever the men and women of all of
four.
our schools. So
Yeah.
this is very special. I know it's sports.
Okay, Tanya, anything else?
No, thank you so much. And I'll prepare that ordinance for emergency, and we can always go a different direction if
Yeah.
need be on the hearing date. So
Yep.
thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So at this time, other items, I see Scott Langton has joined us. We had talked about legislative matters and bringing something back here today. And he has offered to join us. So this, having Scott in the room, let's dive right into this issue, or just a discussion. So I think it's Senate Bill 154, is that the number? Or just pulling it out of my memory here.
Correct, Senator.
Yeah, so Senate Bill 154, a little bit of history, or let's all kind of learn together. I think Deschutes County has not taken a position on this yet, but I guess it was a request from Senator Finley.
It was.
He asked us, through an email, asking commissioners, is there any feedback on the negotiation of a, $3,500 to $7,000 or $5,500 to $7,000, a window of these tax, Scott, you could take it from there. Help us with the terminology.
For the record,
It's got something to do with taxes.
all right. For the record, Scott Langton, County Assessor, and I should have worn my beaver colors
Yeah.
today, so I'm right there with you.
Thank you, Scott. I'm glad.
And
you
also,
know.
this is amazing. This is the first time in a year I've actually had a face-to-face meeting. I had to come downstairs.
Welcome in person, yes.
All right. And I did a brief handout here. I'll give you guys. That hopefully helps illustrate.
Thanks, Scott.
I just didn't want the two teams to play each other, in the Sweet 16.
Early, yeah,
I
maybe
was
later.
like, oh, please, not yet.
Yeah, well, the Beaver's going to win. So.
Well, you can dream all you want. It's very important. Dreaming.
So this gives you a little brief history. The top square is some information I prepared for the Board of Commissioners several years ago, and when they were looking at adopting the first one. So currently we have 2 properties under the pilot program, payment in lieu of tax, and we have 1 property that they'd already built, and then they came before the commission and asked for that, and the commission denied them. So those are the 3 that we have out there right now. The second bracket down is now actually, the first is, we had the Department of Revenue do a pro forma, because Department of Revenue, who is the one that values utility properties, and this is considered a centrally assessed utility on a solar electric. And then we have the actual property that's under, so you can see there's slight differences where the pro forma was under 10 megawatt, they actually built a 9.9. The valuation on the pro forma started out at 13 million. When they actually valued it, it came in at 16.6. So you can see some differences there. The first column is payment in lieu of. That's statutory set currently at 7,000 a megawatt. The next column over that's the REDD is we have a rural energy development zone that is overseen by EDCO as well. Nobody's utilized that of date, but it makes it so a property is eligible for a 3-year exemption. So since that is already in place, I ran that scenario. And then the way the language works too is partway through, if they decide to, because solar projects are quickly depreciating assets, at some point the line intersects between the payment in lieu of and what the ad valorem tax would be. There's a 1-year penalty on that, so you can see that at the bottom. So in the pro forma, you saw that they were actually going to pay a little more under the pilot. Now with the updated information, and there's still a lot of assumptions made into this, since we are forecasting out a number of years. Tax rate remains the same. Is the depreciation accurate based on the pro forma? But now you can see where the pilot would actually pay a little less based on this scenario. So of course, if you change the legislation to 5,500 then that would impact this as well. But my understanding is, and it's all under proposed amendments right now, that it's negotiable at the county level as far as that.
So the proposed legislation is for the pilot program itself, correct?
Correct.
And right now, it's just a flat fee, flat number, $7,000 per megawatt.
Correct.
No negotiation. So then that is the discussion at the state legislature, is if we were allow the counties to have negotiating power, do we support it or not as a county, Deschutes County? And that was what the senator was asking. And I think from our discussion on the call on Friday morning, it was pretty obvious that all of a sudden, two counties next to each other with, comparable land or landscape or elevation or sun exposure, we could end up negotiating against the county commission for a job. It isn't we'll offer you 65, we'll offer you 66,000. So that was the reality of the discussion on Friday. It's like, it's kind of a race to the bottom if we find that happening.
Yeah.
Well, there's several other pieces in the bill as well, but that's the one you guys were
Yeah.
talking about. Because there's some cleanup language on how the taxes are distributed. There's some other changes in here as well. I'm not an expert on solar, but at least in talking with others in the industry, the tax incentive and leveling the payment seems to help, in my understanding, in the way they finance.
Flat fee.
And it helps them to have that known. It appears that the siting of these properties is more in line with where they don't do the big interties like you see out toward Brothers. They don't do the smaller lines. It's that magical distance between that kind of middle, and I don't know the technical term of what.
I mean, the electricity
varies,
substation locations?
Yeah, so it's more location-based than just about anything else.
Yeah.
But then for financing, at least that's what I've heard, is that's the reason they wanted that stability and predictability on the taxation.
Well, and it looks like that $7,000 number was set to generally be in the same exact ballpark as the assessed value. You can see, just like, thank you for running these numbers, it's kind of the right number. If the 1.3 are the other opportunities there, 1.4 for the rural energy zone.
It should be pointed out on that, though, that's running, and this is a project just out Bear Creek a little bit, just on the edge of town. The effective tax rate is a bigger driving factor on that. So if you look at like a rural Lake County, they might only have a $9 tax rate. That scenario is going to be much different than if it's in a tax rate like at $16, where our effective tax rate on this scenario is, I've got it on here someplace. Effective tax rate is about $13 thousand. So that will vary county by county as well. And
This
then
is
as
Deschutes
far
County
as
number.
whether it's favorable to do ad valorem tax or the PILT or whatever, there's a lot of moving parts here. We vote in something new, all of a sudden this scenario looks much different.
Yep, yeah, okay.
So
So 7 just happens to kind of work for Deschutes, it's in the right ballpark for Deschutes County, with it or without it,
at this location
Yep.
in Deschutes County.
at that location, okay.
Yes.
How much of the assessed value is land value and how much is the hardware?
Well, that's what's interesting with this legislation. This also cleans up. It doesn't define, but it calls out for the commissioners to make that determination. Right now, the way the law is written, and I have to believe it was unintended, people just hadn't thought about it, that if you're on leased land, then this only includes the solar project itself, and the land is taxed separately. If the solar project owns the land, and then the agreement doesn't spell it out, which in many cases it doesn't, it sounds like statewide, then the land's included in the 7,000. So there's a huge inconsistency as far as that. So this legislation helps clean that up, so it's intentional at the time of the agreement if the land's included or not.
So that still doesn't give us real good clarity about a legislative position, I don't think, as in why would we get into this one and take a strong position? Any thoughts?
I mean, one other thing we need to, I think is important for us to consider is that land is more scarce in Deschutes County than it is in some of the other Eastern Oregon counties. And so if, I do remember, I feel like I remembered listening to a Board of County Commissioners meeting where there was concerns expressed about, well, we're not allowed to build on this land, which we're not, but if you can build solar on this land, then that there's still development happening. I mean, and during that previous board discussion, it seemed like there was frustration that well, we can't build on this land, build houses on this land, but we can build solar on it. While you look at some counties in like Harney County, they got a lot of land that you can build stuff on, and people aren't frustrated like like a greenfield solar development. It's space intensive, right? And in a community where land is precious, is more precious, like available private land is more precious than, is a greenfield solar farm even, like, do we want to, really, really encourage it and cut our rates to be able to have that, from like a land scarcity perspective. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense.
Well, same conclusion, though. There's not a strong position of Deschutes County.
Right.
I think we have a different situation.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is the 20% of land that we have that's not state or federal. We really, and people move here because it's beautiful.
Right. I mean, it's precious, right?
Yes, precious is a very good word.
Yeah.
Yes, I use that a lot. So definitely.
I mean, that said, the people who are very passionate about renewable energy, and I'm excited about renewable energy, might also say, well, if we care about promoting renewable energy, then giving people, giving solar developers, some tax or fee relief is a good way to stimulate the, kind of shifting our energy portfolio towards, a non-carbon intensive, sources. But so there's all these different layers of consideration. But I just keep coming back to the consideration that if we provide a range, then I really do think there's going to be a race to the bottom. I don't know if I want to encourage that. In some ways, I think the ideal would be to, have a fixed $7,000 rate, and then some of our neighboring counties that are hungrier for economic development, and have more land to spare, they get a better deal, rather than having because if the range is set from 5,500 to 7,000, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of big energy developers out there who drive it down to 5,500. So
I'll be on the call in the morning, legislative Eastern Oregon caucus call with Senator Finley, and I'll mention from Deschutes County's point of view, it's probably not the same issue as other counties. So we're either no comment or we're not supportive, knowing that the number is going to go to the lower, assuming the number is going to go to the lower number no matter what. There'll be pressure to putting it to the lower number. So,
yeah.
Good.
I'd rather see solar on every big box store in town.
Nuclear power. Thank you very much for the discussion. Great spreadsheet, and where that puts it in perspective. This is for that project at that location in this county, but the numbers could be different in other places. So now we know more information.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad that helped. And go Beavs.
Go Beavers.
Can I say go Ducks?
Yeah.
Well, and go Ducks to a point. Thank you, guys.
Good, thank you.
This later?
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so other items, anything to be brought today? Oh, and I do have, so as I said, I didn't bring a binder down. We had 6 applicants for a local public safety coordinating council community member seat. And I do have the resumes. I was able to do the 3 interviews one day, 3 interviews another day. Ken Hales joined me, our community justice director. So it's the 2 of us interviewing these members of the community, 6 great applicants. And we would bring forward Donna Mills from the Central Oregon Health Council director to join the committee of the local public safety coordinating council. So that's the recommendation from the efforts of those 6 interviews. And then, as I say, for us as a group, either accepting that recommendation or wanting to do more review would be the next step.
There's only one slot.
Yeah, so it's 1 community member position, yep. And this was a process started about a month or 5 weeks ago.
Well, I don't know who else was in your pool, but Donna Mills is great. So
Well, as I say, yeah, a couple other great applicants. I didn't bring the binder down, but we do have a nice binder with all the applicant information if you want to take a look at it also.
Okay, well, do you want to just give us a copy or something? And then we
Yep,
can-
that's fine. I'll put the binder in your box so you can look at the other ones and you'll understand who the recommendation was.
Okay.
And then we'll go from there.
Great.
Okay, there we go. Other items?
I would like to bring that letter back on Wednesday, if you don't mind.
Which letter is that?
The letter about challenging the COVID responsibilities, if we could do that on Wednesday.
So that was Eastern Oregon counties. It was
Right.
sent out seeing if people wanted to sign on either as counties or individuals. We have not, I haven't responded to it, and it sounds like you haven't
Well, it was
either.
due on Thursday,
Yeah.
if we wanted your name by noon, but
So then it would be a discussion of the Board of Commissioners of Deschutes County wanting to make a request or a statement.
Yes.
Have you seen that letter?
that was the one that came from Paul Andrus.
Yeah.
I thought he was asking for individual sign-ons.
he said we could sign individually, or we were thinking maybe we would send our own letter. And so that's why I'd like to bring it back on Wednesday.
But I didn't respond to it. I just didn't get on top of it for the time frame he was asking for. So that would, yeah, that's fine. So let's bring it back Wednesday. We'll look at the substantive sentences in it and see if there's support or not.
Well, the good news is today we have 6 positive cases and 5 in the hospital, 0 in ICU. So we're definitely, Mondays seem to be a good number.
We'll see what happens after spring break. Hopefully nobody from Deschutes County is in Miami, Florida right now.
Well, and I'm not, I mean, yeah, maybe the ones that are getting kind of pushing the envelope are not here because I'm not really seeing it in the community. I don't see anybody stressing or pushing
Yeah.
back,
Yeah.
masks are worn.
Yeah.
People are pretty calm, cool, and collected right now, so.
Right, but I mean, it's.
But maybe they've gone other places to get rowdy, yeah.
And
Or-
maybe there's a whole lot of people coming here to
Yeah,
to do spring break in Deschutes County, and I mean yeah.
Okay, understood, yeah.
I guess I would just say that just to kind of give you a sense of what my position will be on that letter. I am not interested in signing on to that letter or something that's very similar to it. So if Paul was asking for whether people wanted to sign on individually, I think that's great for you all to consider if you want to do that. You may be able to get a majority on a letter amongst the three of us, but I'm not interested in signing on to a letter like that.
Okay, well, that's good discussion already on the topic, so, okay. Anything else?
Just real quick, Commissioners, recently in the green FYI folder that was circulated, there was a letter from BLM and Jeff Kitchens regarding some fuel reduction work up near Crooked River Ranch and Steelhead Falls. And two of you kind of penned a little note on there that you'd like a letter of support
Yeah.
for that. So I asked Ed Keith to do that. He's done it. I have a draft. I'll put it in your inboxes, and we can talk about that on Wednesday.
Tom, that project is really close to the county border. I mean, is that within our county, or is that in Jefferson
It
County?
may not be, but it's real close, so obviously it affects us, even if it's not precisely in our county.
Thanks.
Because that's that whole area down there that does not have fire protection on Mackenzie Canyon.
Yeah, and that there was federal legislation on that you've seen in the past, and I'm sure
Yeah.
you track that, and the county line actually bisects Crooked River Ranch, so the northern, probably 10-15% of Crooked River Ranch, or the southern, rather, portion is in Deschutes County, the other half it's predominantly in Jefferson County, but there's a sage and juniper strip, in between the edge of the subdivision to the edge of the canyon and down the canyon,
Yeah.
which, doesn't pay attention to county borders. So I think all of that it may or may not be the actual area contemplated for fuel reduction, may or may not extend into Deschutes County, but just the terrain is pretty consistent all through there, north-south.
Yeah, and I tracked and worked on for a number of years the second egress out of Crooked River Ranch,
Yeah.
and you can bet that if you get a big fire going in the Jefferson County portion of Crooked River Ranch, all those people will be trying to go through the Deschutes County portion of Crooked River Ranch to get out. So, the counties are tied together in Crooked River Ranch.
Okay, great. Anything else?
I don't think so.
So we do have a couple executive sessions today to finish the day. I will kind of formalize it now. So there'll be executive session on ORS 1926602E, real property negotiations, 2H, litigation, 2D, labor negotiations.